Today we're talking about color. More specifically, we're talking about color theory and color science and why it's so powerful that it can change your entire life as a creative. And somewhere along the line, how you might be able to produce super high-end looking books like this one, create beautiful color harmony like this, convey emotion using color science and color theory, showcase different environments through color, and capture things in the most pleasing way possible. Let's get to it. So I don't know about your background with color, I can only tell you mine. So in 2022, I bought my first camera. I wanted to become a photographer. I wanted to produce beautiful images, beautiful colors, beautiful contrast, whatever, you name it. In 2022, this space of photography was absolutely premature, unfortunately. I'm mainly talking about the fact that like many photography creators didn't actually want to give away the nuggets of like creating beautiful images. They just wanted to sell you presets and such. I downloaded a bunch of presets. I realized that they don't work because every single environment is so different that there is no chance for a universal preset to exist. So this passion for photography in a span of like 1 or 2 months, it very quickly changed into, videography. I realized that coloring for videography is even more premature than it is for photography. I started with Premiere Pro, which is unfortunately absolutely not suitable for any sort of like super scientific kind of coloring work. So I very quickly changed to DaVinci Resolve. And I was extremely fascinated by DaVinci Resolve. So it's only natural that I was also on YouTube looking for like these DaVinci Resolve tutorials and such. But after some time, I realized that it's basically the same thing that it is with photographers. Like, photographers are trying to sell you presets, videographers are trying to sell you LUTs and plugins. So it's like, I just felt like every single step of the way, I'm constantly discouraged from actually learning color. And basically what creators want is just to sell you some quick solution that obviously doesn't work. I remember actually being extremely disappointed in every single creator because if this is how they truly think, I almost have to say that this is evil. Already back then, like many years ago, I was so disappointed in like this like grifter culture of people always constantly trying to sell you things that don't work, that I just completely quit looking for the answer inside of videography. So I was like, this is so frustrating. I just need to start studying color. So I did. I remember the first few times I genuinely had to just sit down and study these like, student books of genuine color science. I was just so humbled, like about how much I don't know about the world, because number one, you have traditional art, oil painting, you have printers, you have digital screens. Like these things are so different when it comes to color. It is just impossible to comprehend for a beginner. So obviously the first very important thing for me about color was really understanding that I don't know anything and I just need to humble myself and really sit myself down and just accept it and just learn it. And naturally, when you're actually studying about color and you're not listening to these plugin sellers anymore, the first thing that you have to learn about color is obviously what is color to begin with. And this was basically the biggest shift for me on how I saw the entire world as a whole, because truly everything just changed after this. Obviously, I have the extremely scientific answer, but basically I just want to say it extremely concisely so that I don't spend like 10 hours explaining everything. So believe it or not, but everything around me, like these posters, these books, my screens, my clothes, nothing has color. Color is basically a psychological phenomenon that our brains create based on inputs from our eyes. And what our eyes perceive is ultimately based on the receptors inside of our eyes. So you can imagine it this way. For example, I have my phone right here. What's happening is this: there's a bunch of photons just like bouncing around this entire room. Some of them ultimately land on this phone case. Now, the material of this phone case only reflects mostly yellow light, and some of those photons are going to end up in my eye. And because it only reflects yellow photons and they end up in my eye, I end up seeing this phone case as yellow. And why does this matter? The reason this matters is because after knowing this, you realize that nothing has color to begin with. All there is pigments, materials that reflect some sort of wavelengths and don't reflect others. We get to the topic of wavelengths. So we obviously have what's called the visible spectrum for humans. So the visible spectrum is basically every single color that the human eye can perceive under monochromatic light. For us, monochromatic light means that there's only one single light source. There are no multiple lights shining light rays. For us, this single light source is the sun. And you might notice that on the visible spectrum, there are a bunch of colors missing, mainly every single color between blue and red. So like mostly pink, purple, magenta, these kind of shades. And the reason is because under monochromatic light, these colors are not possible. What does it really mean that they're not possible? The reason I said monochromatic light is because these kind of colors, pink, purple, magenta, they're only possible under polychromatic light. So on the digital screen, for example, you can now have a purple color basically purely by 1 pixel alone. And obviously most people know this, that you have to actually mix these kind of colors to come up with new colors. And the main colors are obviously red, green, and blue for digital screens. But this is already a lot to take in, and I remember this frustrated me a lot, but believe me, these are extremely important details because it's only when you know, the full image that everything starts to make sense. For example, why do you think there's a lack of pink, purple things in nature? Well, we obviously just discussed that under monochromatic light, these colors are impossible. But obviously, scientifically, when we say that, we're talking about light emission and not light reflection. Light reflection works a bit different. As I said with my phone case, things, plants, foliage, greenery, all these kind of things just reflect color. And the thing is, even if you go out, even like in sunlight, you do have some purple things. So how is this possible? As I already said, we have something called the visible spectrum, which is basically just a set of wavelengths. Spans from 400 nanometers to 700 nanometers. This is what we can see. And by the way, just as a side note, the visible spectrum, the colors that humans can see, is an extremely tiny portion of all possible light in the universe. So we're kind of missing out on a lot. So it's basically not possible to have pink and purple light from a single light source. But even under a single light source, it's possible to reflect those colors. And why, you may be asking? That's because every single pigment or material has something called the emission spectrum. That is basically all the wavelengths that they reflect. However, for something to look pink, purple, magenta, they have to have an emission spectrum spike along the two ends, which is extremely rare in nature. This is why we only have a handful of plants that actually have this kind of emission. And why do you think all of this science matters when we're talking about things like videography and such? That is because color is mainly psychological. We tend to associate attributes to colors basically. So a pure white color, as the name suggests, conveys purity. The black color, for example, which is the color that we see in absence of every single other color, is obviously the same thing. It just looks dark. It looks like it's missing everything that we tend to associate with every single other color. So it tends to look dark in essence. For example, a cool blue color we tend to associate with oceans and such. We tend to associate calm with this kind of color. And the reason this exact thing matters for purple as well is because there's such a lack of purple in nature. We tend to look at purple as this super rare, majestic color. And when you study color science, you tend to realize that even in nature, there are so many interesting physical phenomena happening that just end up looking beautiful. Once you finally understand it, you can use it to your own advantage. For example, what color do you think the sky is? Obviously, most people would say it's blue. Obviously, we're talking about a cloudless, clear day. So they would say blue. So there I would say, well, what kind of blue? They might start thinking about it. They might say, it's light blue, right? It's well, not quite there yet. If you're curious, this shade of blue, like the color of the sky, is basically azure. However, it's important to know that it's not azure everywhere. For example, if you're talking about a sunlit day, around the sun, it's going to look azure. But for example, if you look to the side, it looks deep blue. So how is that possible? There are so many scientific things to explain here. For example, why do you think the sky is azure to begin with? Why is it not just see-through if we were looking at air? That's obviously because of the chemical components. These chemical components are also molecules themselves, so they do have an energy. And because they have an energy, they do have a wavelength. And because they have a wavelength, they do correspond to a color on the visible spectrum. So they have a color. However, the sun also has temperature, and it's not measured in Celsius or Fahrenheit, it's measured in Kelvin. That is the scientific measurement for space stuff. If I remember correctly, the sun is 5720 Kelvin, which is almost perfect white to our eyes. So if 5720 Kelvin is almost perfectly white, why does the sun look yellow and orange all the time? Once again, a beautiful physical phenomenon. So basically, because our sky is blue and the sun is white, the sky is basically like removing all the blues from the sun, and what's left is obviously the warm color. So it's like yellows and oranges and reds. And this is why we see the sun as yellow and orange most of the time. However, the light rays from the sun itself doesn't go through as much filtering, basically this blue filtering, so the light rays do stay relatively white. If you were to look at NASA photographs, for example, from space, the sun is actually white from space. It's only yellow and orange when looked at from the surface of the Earth. The reason I'm talking about all of this is because color starts to make so much more sense after you understand all of these things. If you're an aspiring color expert, videographer, whatever, any sort of artist, these things are so essential. You just cannot miss out on these. These are so important to know, really. And it's obviously one thing to learn about actual science behind colors if you do not know color theory. Color theory is basically just a huge field about how colors interact with each other. So the thing that changed my life the most is basically the framework in which we are supposed to think of color when we're concerned with color theory. It consists of 5 things. Number 1, color properties, which is just hue, value, saturation. Color relationships, which is color harmony. Color contrast, how do you make colors pop? Color perception, how do we see color as people? And color application, which is how you use color to your work. All of these are extremely important, by the way. Let's talk about the first one. So hue, value, saturation. Basically, if you're working with color digitally, you just have to nail these every single time. But in order for that to happen, you have to have the perfect tools. And basically, all you have to know is that the RGB color picker is absolutely inadequate for this. It's not perfect. Let's talk about the next one, which is color relationships. That's basically nothing more than just color harmony. Colors that are harmonious with each other, we have a few categories of these. Obviously, the most simple one is complementary color. Then we have analogous color. Then we have triadic, tetradic, and monochromatic. And we also have some rare ones like double complementary and these kind of things. Color contrast actually ties in closely with color harmony, but only when you're talking about complementary colors. But color contrast as a whole is basically just the balance of your colors. For example, if you know about DaVinci, you know that we have this thing called a vector scope. That is a tool that can actually help you determine how good your color balance is. And color balance ultimately determines color contrast. We have the fourth one, which is the most important one of all, I think, is color perception, how you see colors as a person. I don't want to get into all the scientific details, but there is this thing which is called the Weber-Fechner law. All that basically says is, without all the scientific explanations, is that for us humans to see a difference in color, it's way easier to do in the darker areas. For example, if I have a mathematically perfect black to white gradient right here, I'm gonna put it on screen. This just doesn't look right. Like, this looks mostly white. Like, why? That's obviously because our eyes work this way. However, if I were to actually correct this effect myself, the gradient would look something like this. But if you're looking at your scopes, this no longer looks like a perfect gradient. And this is why we have so many problems with colors as a whole. By the way, I would like to mention that color, to this day, is still an active area of scientific research. So all the information there is about color, it's not like color is finished and we have every single piece of knowledge to know about color. It's still a mystery waiting to be figured out completely. But by today's standards, in 2026, we have such advanced knowledge on colors that I would say it is absolutely the best time to start to learn color theory, to start to learn color science as a whole, and to apply it to your own work. Because simply just like 7-8 years ago, we didn't have the tools we have today. Believe it or not today, and by the way, this thing was introduced in 2021, we actually have perceptual color spaces. For example, here I'm gonna put a normal RGB color picker, and here's a perceptual one. You can just basically tell how much smoother this one looks. And this is why I say that sitting in front of YouTube, listening to these plugin sellers is not going to help you become the artist you always wanted to be. This is why me as well, probably just like you, I was so frustrated with YouTube because all I ever wanted was to just learn about color. And none of these creators gave me that. They always wanted to sell me presets, they always wanted to sell me LUTs and plugins and power grades, but they never for a single second bothered to explain color theory. Thinking about it logically, like probably most of them don't even study color like that. It is not useful for you if your goal is to genuinely learn about color and not just buy some like $600 plugin. But obviously there is a reason I can just say here without any scripts and notes or whatever, and I can just say all of these things off the top of my head is because I put in the years. If you're truly curious, like I don't have anything open here. I just have DaVinci and on my other screen, basically nothing. But that's beyond the point. Obviously, I was not trying to say that I'm the smartest human on earth. What I'm saying is that if you do study color enough, for enough years, you're just gonna be able to recite these things endlessly because it's that essential. And the reason I say this is so useful is because if you're a videographer and you're sitting in front of your client and they say they want to have an extremely warm, very sunsetty kind of image, you're instantly going to be able to tell that we're just not going to be able to fake it in post. Is because there are so many environmental things that contribute to that effect. It cannot be faked. Whereas, you know, like beginner freelancers might just say, oh yeah, we'll just fix it in post. And we know how that goes. Absolutely, I truly believe that color science, color knowledge, color theory truly trumps everything. It doesn't matter if you use CapCut, it doesn't matter if you use DaVinci Resolve, it doesn't matter if you watch all the tutorials. If you do not know these things, you're just not going to be able to create coherent work. And if you're for some reason skeptical, by the way, I think this is the best time to introduce my ultimate body of work, which is my book. So it's this thing right here. This was possibly the most difficult and insane project of my entire life. And the reason this was so difficult and took me like an entire month to design these like 110 pages is because I just had to include every single aspect of my knowledge, like videography work, color grading work, color science knowledge, typography, book design, like everything. It was just so difficult, whatever. But still, I wanted to create a book that looks extremely cinematic, yet scientifically accurate. I've actually been a very big fan of like these cinematic photo books from like movies and such. This was one of the reasons that I wanted to create my own. But like one difference that I see is like, for example, when I'm looking at my own book, like what I see is just this like hyper realism, like I'm there, you know. It's so crazy to just look at a book and feel this. Obviously that I think is just a testament to all the color knowledge that is required to produce something like this. Because you have to understand that like, you know, knowing color science and color theory and coloring digitally is like a walk in the park compared to actually coloring for print. Like printing is a nightmare. Like I'm talking, I had to order 4 test copies just to get the colors right because printing is so genuinely frustrating. For example, here we have this beautiful drone image of Monaco. This was such a pain to get right. We also have many other beautiful things, but all of them just look hyper realistic and beautiful. For example, if you look at these 2 images, this could never have been possible without me having to learn color for so many years to get it right. And obviously, once again, it's not my intention to come across as a douchebag. What I'm saying is that I was so frustrated with color for so many years. I was always sitting there, why doesn't this look right? But there is a reason for everything, you know? For example, if you made a beautiful color grade, but it still doesn't look right, the reason is probably color harmony. You just use colors that look beautiful, but do not work well together. Or you just simply used colors that look just way too far apart. And this is what I would say. The biggest tip, the biggest advice I can give is probably this. Please do not overcomplicate your color grading workflow with plugins, presets, whatever. There are just so many golden rules that you kind of must adhere to. But beyond that, you do have your freedom. It's not like you're locked inside this bubble. You just have to be aware of these things, to not make mistakes. But if you're aware of the mistakes, you're free to do whatever. For example, look at this image. Possibly one of my best works ever. This single image is just so crazy. And the reason I'm holding it like this is because we have many reflections, but this is just ridiculous. I worked so hard on this. Obviously, we have many more. For example, if you're always aware of physical phenomena happening in nature, you're gonna be able to create color grades like this. By the way, I would like to mention once again, things like DaVinci Resolve, digital color. This is a walk in the park compared to traditional painting, oil painting, printing. These are so complex, truly. Working on a backlit screen is a dream compared to traditional art. So if anything, digital colorists should be grateful that they have such an easy job. For example, look at this one. This was taken obviously in Paris. This one as well was extremely difficult to get right. Because for one, you have to represent the essence of night scientifically correctly. On top of that, you have to convey emotion that you want to make people feel. On top of that, you have to have your own unique creative input. On top of that, you have to make it look pleasing in terms of brightness and color harmony. And on top of that, you have to make a good look on print, which is extremely difficult. This is the exact moment a lightning struck an open meadow. It just looks insanely beautiful and unique. And this is what I'm talking about. If you truly put the time in, study color, forget the DaVinci Resolve tutorials, you're just going to notice this thing so much more and appreciate it so much more, and you're going to be a unique expert. You can also do many other things. For example, convey what it's like to stand in a cold winter day purely through colors. Like, this is crazy. Or another beautiful physical phenomena, what it's like to stand on top of a hill and experience a sunrise. Like, this is just insane. Or you can just capture beautiful moments like this and color it scientifically correctly while still having your creative input as a creator. And this is basically what I live for. This book was so difficult to make, it was so much headache, it cost me so much money, but it was worth every single penny and every single second of my time, for sure. I could go on and on for so many hours talking about all the beautiful things there is in the world that I appreciate so much, that changed my perspective on everything. But I think this video is enough for you to start your journey. Honestly, when I decided to study color, buy all the student books, all the materials and whatever, I just wish there was a video like this, because this would have been so helpful to clear so many things up. Tell me why it's important to know color, and tell me why it's not that important to worry about all the tools and plugins. So I think this video is the perfect introduction to motivate people, to show people why color is beautiful, to learn about color science and color theory, and also how you can apply it to your own work. So if you like this video, I really appreciate it. Save it, come back to it every single time that you feel like you're just a bit confused, you need a little bit of motivation, because this video was intended to serve that purpose.